We're here at Nixon Park in Kennett Square, Chester County. The park straddles two municipalities, Kennett Township and the borough of Kennett Square, and the park is managed by Kennett Area Park Authority. The park is working in partnership with the Brandywine Red Clay Alliance on a 4,400-foot stream restoration on the east branch of the Red Clay Creek. This project addresses steeply eroding, deeply incised stream banks with active erosion that threatens park infrastructure such as this trail and dog park. These actively eroding banks contribute sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus pollution to the stream, and the sediment causes embeddedness of the cobble and gravel floor of the stream, reducing the diversity of aquatic life and benthic invertebrates. Phase 1 of the stream restoration was completed in the spring of 2020, and in the background you can see the stream banks have been pulled back to a 3 to 4 to 1 slope, covered with an erosion blanket and replanted. This spring we'll plant live stakes of dogwood and willow to stabilize those banks, as well as additional riparian tree buffers. In the foreground here you see a root wad, which is a buried tree with the roots exposed, that further protects that bank from stream erosion and has created this cobble bed in front of it that protects the stream from further erosion. In some places, a rock wall is needed to protect the stream from further erosion and protect infrastructure such as the trail. In addition, rock veins that jut out into the stream push the energy of the stream to the center, thereby protecting the stream further from erosion. During our presentation, we'll talk about the partnership with the municipality, the Kennett Area Park Authority, and the Brandywine Red Clay Alliance, from design through implementation of this project.
All right. Great. Thanks for that. That was a cold day in December or January. We filmed that. We're in snow now. So this is a project that's midway through completion. So thanks everybody for joining us. We want to share with you what the project is, how the partnership was developed, and we could talk a little bit about some of the MS4 crediting. From the presentations I've heard, this is very similar in that it has a lot of really strong partnerships that take time to develop. So I would say that's one of the key takeaways here, and our partnership with the Kennett Area Park Authority was really instrumental with that. We are a nonprofit watershed organization, the Brandywine Red Clay Alliance, believe it or not, founded 75 years ago. So one of the first small watershed organizations. And we've had a relationship with the Kappa for a long time. We held trout rodeo and other events there that John will highlight. Our organization started a program back in 2008 called Red Streams Blue, and you may know my predecessor, Bob Struble, took a look at 8 different watersheds. So we developed 8 watershed assessment reports and plans. So we did basically sub-watersheds in the Brandywine and Red Clay. We're part of the Christina Basin that flows into the Delaware River. And the idea of these was to assess a watershed and look at primarily sediment pollution, which also, of course, affects nitrogen and phosphorus. We also look at habitat. And each of these plans did water data analysis, aerial analysis, and most importantly, a lot of on-the-ground work. We've been looking at some of the remote sensing technology to help us find actively eroding streams, but I will say nothing really beats that on-the-ground work. And I wasn't here then, but they walked every mile of the stream. And so one section that we did was the upper east branch of the Red Clay Creek. And the idea is to look at those impaired streams that have opportunity for improvement. So this is an aerial of the upper east branch of the Red Clay. It starts in East Marlboro Township in Kennett County up here at the top. It flows through Kennett Township, Kennett Borough, and then down into Delaware, actually where I live and where I'm sitting now. The stream was agricultural, but you can see it's really developing into suburban. So it has still some open ag fields. There's legacy sediments, and there is stormwater runoff from those subdivisions. And this map shows you the idea of our assessment plans is to look at what are the high and medium priority opportunities for water stream restoration. We look at property owners where we know we can have success. We look to work in municipalities where we get support. We have strong support from both Kennett Township and Kennett Borough. So these projects will add up to over 2 miles of restored stream. So by aggregating our stream restorations in these sub-watersheds, we believe we make a bigger impact. They don't always work out, top to bottom. This was our first restoration. It's a farm, a horse farm that was restored, kind of pulling the livestock out of the stream, fencing, and riparian buffers primarily. There's also our partners are working on some ag BMPs here. Probably the most interesting one that would probably been presented here before is a golf course. So, a lot of golf courses are on streams. Some golf courses we worked at in the past simply want us to armor the stream to prevent erosion. But this golf course was really forward thinking. That's the Kennett Area Golf and Country Club. They were losing a tee, and luckily their superintendent is very interested in riparian plantings and vegetation. And he saw an opportunity that if we restored the stream, we could preserve the tee. And he was willing to put a lot of that restored stream into riparian buffer. So it's really unique opportunity, but really includes a beautiful riparian buffer. And he has the horticultural experience to really maintain that. He walks a fine line with the golfers. One thing he learned was tall meadows don't work well next to the tee because they can't see where their ball landed. So he is always adjusting, but it's a really great restoration there. We did another restoration here. This one in yellow is slated to be done. It's one we're looking for funding for. But here's what we're going to talk about today. This is the Upper East Branch coming down here in this sort of beige color is in the park, and then the tributary coming here is the other section. So together, this is over 4,400 feet of stream restoration. We broke this into 2 phases for ease of funding and for management. And you can see the net result that would have together. So now I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about the park and why they are interested in doing this stream restoration.
Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm John Gaadt. I am the Vice Chair of the Kennett Area Park Authority. We own and maintain Anson B. Nixon Park. We've got just over 106 acres, 3/4 of which is in Kennett Township, about 1/4 of which, 27 acres, is in Kennett Square Borough. We have 2 ponds that comprise 6 acres of the property, and they were actually ponds that were part of the Kennett Waterworks in the past, no longer, but had been part of the water supply system for the borough of Kennett Square. We also, as Brian mentioned, have over 4,400 linear feet of stream and tributaries along the East Branch of the Red Clay Creek. We serve just under 200,000 people annually, and most of those participants or those visitors to the park are from the borough of Kennett Square and Kennett Township, but also from surrounding municipalities. We have a world-class 18-hole disc golf course that's gotten a lot of recognition in recent years. We have walking trails. We're both an active and passive recreation facility, so lots of walking trails, picnic pavilions, volleyball, tennis, those kinds of things. And we have a number of events. And those events were part of the partnerships that we formed over many years with the borough, the township, and the Brandywine Red Clay Alliance. Brian, next slide. Just wanted to give you a perspective on what we're talking about here. You saw a little of it in Brian's slide, but this is the park. We are actually framed on the west side and the south side by east branch of the Red Clay Creek to the west, coming down south, and then that tributary, the unnamed tributary, meeting with it. So those two streams are a big part of the park. They're a big part of the amenities. They're a big part of the scenic view sheds, the beauty of the park. And we started to see some issues over the years. We started to see the kind of erosion that you saw in the video that Brian showed earlier. We started to see some degradation of our trails and of some of the active and passive open space areas in the park. And we grew concerned over the years about a number of things: upstream development that had occurred prior to good stormwater management regulations, and the impact of a lack of volume control upstream, and how that was causing more storm or erosive storm events downstream. And we've noticed in recent years that we're seeing a lot more frequent and erosive types of storm events. So both the size and the number of those events we're starting to see more and more of. We felt we needed to do something. Brian, if you could go to the next slide.
John, and you might be good to note, this is the borough and the township,
and the township.
Those two share.
Yep, I plan to share that. Thank you, Brian. So what were we going to do? We were aware, because of other partnering activities with the Brandywine Red Clay Alliance, of some of the work they were doing upstream that Brian mentioned a minute ago. And we were aware, of course, that we've been seeing problems in the park that were exacerbating over the years. So our role in the stream restoration was really to facilitate the initial process and in-kind and volunteer staff time and volunteer board time to see this project through to fruition. The first thing, of course, is that we were experiencing all these problems. We reached out to BRC to assess the likelihood of becoming part of their overall planning strategy along the east branch of the Red Clay Creek. And we said, hey, what's the likelihood of doing a project in the park and looking not only at the east branch, but that tributary that feeds into it right in the borough of Kennett Square? We had a number of meetings. Brian mentioned the importance of partnerships. We had a number of meetings over a period of time. We met with the Chester County Water Resources Authority. We met with the two municipalities, Kennett Square Borough and Kennett Township. We had a series of meetings with BRC, Brandywine Red Clay Alliance. And we actually came to an understanding that we could all work together to solve a common problem. When I talk to other people about this project, it's not just a win-win for me, it's a win-win-win. It's the way I look at it. The park is actually seeing, restored stream banks and bank stabilization. We're protecting our open space and we're preserving our trails. BRC, Brandywine Red Clay Alliance, is restoring another portion of the Red Clay watershed as part of their overall stream assessment project. And both Kennett Township and Kennett Square Borough were able to include this project in their PRP planning and TMDL planning to get MS4 credits. And they, of course, are helping to clean our waterways. Our in-kind and voluntary efforts really were, the board and staff are helping do construction monitoring when construction is underway. We will be, of course, assisting with all the riparian stream planting using volunteers. We do annual stream cleanups, another project in conjunction with the Brandywine Red Clay Alliance. And there's been a tremendous amount of community outreach for this. And we've gotten a lot of people that have expressed interest in volunteering. But if one of the most important things for us is that it's building goodwill in the community. And there's a sense of shared accomplishment here. We're really accomplishing quite a bit. And it's all through these kinds of partnerships with everyone working together to see multiple objectives being achieved. Brian, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks, John. So once we determined that this was the place where we wanted to do the project, we entered into the design phase. And John, that was CAPA that got a Growing Greener grant. I think it was $77,500.
Right.
And we hired Dr. Aaron Klauser Environmental, who did the watershed plan to do that plan. So he completed that plan, I think, in 2018. And one of the important things that I know Krista Brown wants to make sure that we mention, that we always do a pre-application meeting at the Southeast office with DEP, and it's good to include Krista or have an MS4 review of the plan to make sure that, you know, it is eligible for those sediment reductions, because there are certain things in stream restorations that are eligible and not eligible. And we also, during that design phase, is when we decided we would break this into 2 phases. That allows for ease of funding, for grant funding primarily, but also the ease of managing a larger project like this. This slide here shows something that's probably of interest if you haven't done a stream restoration before. We always work in a dry stream bed to reduce erosion. So our contractors do some pumping. This project involved a lot of pumping. They put up a temporary dam for the day. They pump around. But we, as a practice, always return the water into the stream at the end of the day. And we think that has a better effect on maintaining the aquatic health. So we do not pump overnight. We always return it when we can. And luckily, these are small enough streams that that can be done. Our timeline was a design and permitting phase in 2018. Of course, there's grant writing for that phase. Then we went into grant writing and fundraising for the projects. That's when we started talking to the township and borough about contributions, building out our budget. We actually got this work done right after the COVID shutdown allowed contractors to get back to work in May. So we did phase 1, most of it. We just got a grant for phase 2, and we'll be putting that to bid. All of our projects are put to bid. That'll be put to bid late winter, early spring. And then we'll be doing, we plan to do some riparian plantings for what was done last summer, this spring, and then we'll do another round in the fall. We do find the biggest risk time for these restorations is that time when vegetation hasn't yet established and you get big storms. And it was a rough year last year. We actually had to come in, put back some of our erosion and sediment matting. We've had to restore some areas. So we're anxious to get those plantings in. John and I are planning especially live stakes coming this spring. That'll be a March activity. But what I wanted you to know was these projects are 3 years, probably at the minimum, from start to completion of construction, and can take longer with permitting and relationships. So there is a timeline that takes place. The benefits are obviously the stabilizing those steeply eroded banks. This is that dog park and trail actively eroding bank. You did see in some photos, we do have to do armoring. It's not our preferred method. Interestingly, at the golf course, by the way, it started out as an armoring project and we added much more riparian benefits there. But the first thing we did was armoring. Armoring does not count as credit. So the majority of project you don't want to be armoring, but we will put some rock armoring here to protect that trail. Where we can, we pull the banks back with the excavator to a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 slope. It reduces not just the sediment, but also the phosphorus and nitrogen pollution. It does help with the MS4 reduction. We often build in structures that encourage fish and wildlife habitat. I know there are families that fish in the creek. We sometimes add things like mud sills or rock structures that allow scour holes where fish can be. It's definitely an aesthetic impact. And we coordinate with the park plans. So we work very closely. We've done this in other parks. This project is probably a little more expensive and difficult because the park has some nice riparian zones. So we sort of leapfrog between forested areas to open areas. And that's in large part because the park's done such a good job with their riparian areas. So It's not, quite honestly, it's easier to work in a farm field where you have a big open slate and you can just do all your restoration at once. But this one we leapfrog, trying to preserve as many of the trees that are there as possible. This is a slide with the board, the Kappa board. You can see another area where the erosion gets near the trail. So on the funding side, we got a Growing Greener grant for the design. First phase was a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant. So those of you in the Delaware River watershed, several years ago, the Delaware River Basin Act started directing U.S. Fish and Wildlife funds to the Delaware Basin, which has been terrific. I think it was $8 million last year, lobbying for 10 this year. So there is funding. It does add another layer of review, but National Fish and Wildlife Foundation does a great job of helping us navigate. We just have to make sure we meet all those federal requirements. And then we just applied for a Growing Greener grant and received that just a month ago. And that's going to fund phase 2. These are all matching each other. And it was really important that we got the municipal support. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But the township and the borough together contributed $100,000. Essentially, that was the part of the budget we needed filled. And we asked the township and the borough to figure out how they want to divide that up. And we'll get to that in a minute. I should mention that we're fortunate that the William Penn Foundation's Delaware River Watershed Initiative, a large initiative with 8 clusters from the Poconos down to Delaware, this is in a focus area. So the William Penn Foundation has helped support some of our staff time for a lot of the background work that sets these projects up for stream restoration. So we're grateful to them for that. When we started looking at this and we met with Kennett Township and Borough, primarily the engineers, it turned out that the township needed 100 tons of sediment reduction, although more of the stream was in the borough. And so 34% is in the township and 65 in the borough. But what the township and borough negotiated was the township agreed to pay 60% and receive a greater amount of that reduction for their MS floor plan, where the borough paid 40. So that worked out well for everybody involved. And then DEP allowed that to be accredited. And if there's questions, David Athey can speak more to that. These are photos after phase 1. So you could see where these banks are pulled back to a 3 to 4 to 1 slope. There's a little bit of a floodplain reconnection over here. There's some armoring here with some banks here. This is a rock vein that pushes that energy to the center of the stream and can create some fish habitat. And lo and behold, we already have egrets showing up this spring. So that was great with the project. So all in all, like John said, a win, win, win. And these are our contact for John and I. At this time, I think it's best if we open up any questions or comments.
Okay, we do have a few questions on here. There was a question about the timeline. You did have references about the project was a long time in the making, and you showed a project timeline. But what about the partnership that was necessary for this project? How long did it take to form that partnership, from initial discussions about the project to plan development and grant application?
You want to take that, John?
I can speak initially to that, Brian. It took some time. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I actually worked with Bob Struble, Brian's predecessor, when we first started talking about this. Brian, how long have you been on the job now?
3 years.
3 years. So, I mean, this is a project that from conception to actual construction is 4 to 5 years in the making. Now, all projects would most likely not be the same. So, but we felt in order to get this kind of partnership together, where we're dealing with multiple organizations, municipal government, more than one municipal government, two nonprofits, We're also seeking out grant funding from a variety of sources, and that took some creativity. All those things take time, and even when you apply for the grants, you're waiting for a period of time before you even know if you've got the money to move forward with the project. So I think from start to finish, we're probably looking at about 5 years with everything, or maybe a little more. Brian, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll concur. I mean, John, remember too, we have one small property owner. We try, it's best for us not to have too many property owners, but it was a small rental property. The landlord lived out of town. And of course, you know, you have to get landowner agreements with the Growing Greener grant. And that took some time. Quite honestly, it was such a small portion. If he said no, we would have removed the restoration there, but it would have left a hole. It is typical. We just finished a very similar project, not finished. We're in the middle of it, Plum Run, 2 private landowners and Toll Brothers. And it just took a lot of time convincing them, talking to them, making them comfortable with this project on their property.
And another comment here about the funding, endorsing the funding through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation under the Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund, and a note about the huge value provided by the nonprofits and the volunteers to benefit municipalities on projects like this. Could you talk a little bit about the volunteers, what all they did, how you managed that process?
Well, I mean, the park, from the standpoint of the park, I mean, we're here to serve the public. The board of our park is all volunteers. We do not have a large staff. We have a park manager who's actually only a part-time person. We have a couple of other staff that help mow and maintain some of the park facilities, and we have an office manager that's part-time. So it's a small run operation. We rely on volunteers. So anything that we do in the park either involves the volunteer board or volunteers in the community. And I think we've been particularly fortunate because this has been the way we've functioned for many years. So being able to reach out to the community is not something new for us. And it's just, you know, part of what we do. There was a lot of volunteer time that I put into this project to help coordinate these meetings. It was fortunate for me because I know a lot of the players from my daytime job. I actually work as an environmental and land use planning consultant and have worked with a number of organizations that were involved in this project. So that helped because I was able to understand the process. Brian?
Yeah, and I will note, Brandywine Red Clay Alliance is a small nonprofit. We're 8 employees. I'm a one-person department, watershed conservation. So while we are not volunteering our time, I know the design grant and the second grant, BRC is in-kind contributing our time. Where we can, we get reimbursement for our time, but it's a small amount, 5% or less, usually under $4,000. So our nonprofit raises the money for my position from fundraising and other traditional nonprofit sources. So in a way, it's a little bit like volunteering in that sometimes our contribution goes on the in-kind side to help meet the match.
Very good. And another question here, a little bit more technical one. You did mention the benefit of the pre-application meetings with DEP to verify the sediment reductions, which is a great approach and a good way to iron out any misunderstandings or inconsistencies ahead of time. We have a question here about the crediting itself. What method was used to calculate the credits? When in the process did DEP approve the credit amount?
That's a question. Good question, and we anticipated that. David, can you chime in and talk about that? David's the engineer for the township.
Yeah, hi. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Brian, for the opportunity. As Brian indicated, when we had actually had a meeting, obviously before all the COVID stuff hit, in the days when we actually could all sit around a big table between the borough's engineer, the township, myself as a township engineer, Brian, I believe Aaron might have been there. John, you may have as well. I'm forgetting, but initially the crediting was going to be literally based on the linear footage of the stream and the tributary in the borough and the township. But it became evident through that meeting that the borough was actually, they were farther along on their TMDL plan than the township, and they frankly didn't need that much of a reduction. And I conferred with the township and kind of convinced them, because so much of this was being grant funded, they frankly wouldn't get a better deal. And I made the pitch that as much as the township or the borough is willing to acquiesce on and the township could buy, they really ought to do that. So the township manager and the borough manager had an offline conversation, and they arrived at a 60-40 split, even though the ratio of the linear footage in the township and the borough is actually pretty much opposite that. So that's kind of how the deal was cut. I don't know what the ramifications of that deal might be. Obviously, the borough and the township, as John alluded to, coordinate on and collaborate on a lot of different things. So maybe the borough will get a better deal on some future initiative. But to answer the question on the TMDL plan, I literally just provided the total linear footage of the main stem and the tributary, multiplied times 115 pounds per linear foot, because we were using map shed in the load calculations, and just explained what had happened and multiplied that number times 60% and showed it against the total load that we were mandated to reduce. I should say, when did DEP approve the credit? And I know there are a couple of folks from DEP on the line. I definitely don't want to put either of them on the spot unless they'd like to chime in, but we have gotten comments back on the TMDL plan that we're in the process of addressing, but none of them had to do with Nixon Park. So I would say kind of by default, they have approved it, and we're certainly assuming they're going to approve it in the final plan. But again, in essence, we just showed that 60% ratio, how we did the math, and just literally included it on the TMDL plan as such.
Very good. And maybe a little early, I know it looks like you're just finishing this up. Have you done any, do you have any plans for comparing pre and post water quality data, TSS or turbidity or anything like that? Or is that kind of something still in discussion?
So the stream is monitored a lot, has several sites with USGS and the Chester County Water Authority, so we use that data. We had done 8 testing sites back in the original plan of 2010. We're hoping to do that again. And then through the William Penn Foundation, Stroud and the Academy are doing some testing as well. So that's how we're monitoring the project. I will say that these major restorations take 5 or 10 years to start to show results, to get the colonization and whatnot.
Right.
So it's sort of a long term.
Yeah, for the stream to reach equilibrium, and for the vegetation to really start to provide the benefits. We have just a few more minutes. I was wondering about the permitting process. I assume you had to go through the Corps of Engineers. Any tips or information for the group on how that process unfolds and when that process should start?
Yeah, Aaron Klauser, Dr. Klauser does it for us. He's got really great relationships, and I really believe relationships are a lot of how this work gets done. He calls those agencies early. He asks them questions. He gets them on site. They're often grateful to get on site. I remember this project, he had someone from Army Corps looking at some of the wetlands that he had questions about. And I think it saves him a lot of time to know how they're going to rule on a potential wetland. For example, there is a dam. I guess it's a dam. It looks more like a ford, John. And there's a wetland behind it. And we elected not to do anything with that dam because it's a nice wetland system that would drain. And that was one of the good conversations he had with the Corps ahead of time, kind of doing more damage than good. So I think that's it. I think the pre-application meeting is good. It's just being really open and having those conversations early.
Yeah, I think the message on relationships and having those discussions early in the process, it's excellent advice. We've got a note here from Krista Brown. They met with Pennsylvania DEP SERO for a pre-app meeting. I sat in on the meeting to ensure that what they were doing would qualify for credits. During these meetings, we were able to identify any potential crediting issues. Receipt of a Chapter 105 permit does not guarantee MS4 credit. So just a little other clarification on that point. Any other questions from the group? Go ahead and type those into the chat box. Any final words from the presenters? We have till 11:05, so we've still got a few minutes here if there are any final comments or questions.
I have a comment just following up on what David Athey was saying. Actually, we're having a phone call later today with the township. I think I'm a big fan of these watershed restoration plans and mapping projects because as a watershed organization, we really have the big picture in mind and where the opportunities in the watershed are to make biggest impact. And I think whenever we can overlay that with a municipality's MS4 planning, we both win, and we can kind of direct municipalities to projects where there's opportunity to make real difference. So we appreciate that opportunity. And every time you get a successful project, it helps move that forward.
Yeah, success breeds further success. Any final comments from either of you or any final questions? We're going to wrap it up here if not.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this project today. Brian and I were looking forward to this and to sharing our thoughts and ideas. You know, it really is a partnership. It really does take some time to forge those partnerships. But I think a project like this is a testimony to how well it can work out.